Welcome to the Gospel Chariot podcast with Greg Smith. Join me for theological ramblings, thoughts, Bible classes, sermons, and an occasional guest. If you're searching for a confident relationship with God, if you're seeking clarity in your eternal purpose, you have found the right podcast. Let's open God's Word and hear His message. And may the Holy Spirit direct my words and enrich your hearing. So this morning I wanted to talk to you for a few minutes about the glory of God, and we've been looking at this comparison between Old Testament prophets and the message of Jesus. And in this message, it's really about the glory of God and what the glory of God represents. So we're going to be kind of summarizing some of the book of Ezekiel and also grabbing some teaching from Jesus. So in Ezekiel chapter 1, Ezekiel gets this incredible vision, and it is the vision of the glory of God. And I would try to explain it to you. It's better if you just read it. So after this sermon, you need to go read Ezekiel chapter 1. But this vision of God, there are creatures and wheels and wings and glory, and the center of it shines like metal, and it has these wheels that turn, and it looks like a wheel that's in a wheel, and all of the wheels have eyes. I tried to get AI to create it. Not possible. Just can't do it. It is just so incredible and descriptive. But what Ezekiel sees is an image of the glory of God. And when he sees that image of the glory of God, that is when God calls Ezekiel to service and tells Ezekiel what his message to the people is supposed to be and what his life is supposed to be about. Now, the interesting thing about that is it's something that's really kind of incredible, but you have to think about it just a little bit. So Ezekiel at that time, Ezekiel's world it's a little bit different. You see that green area? And that green area covers most of the known world at the time. That green area at that time is the kingdom of Babylon. And when Ezekiel sees this vision, Ezekiel is an exile in Babylon. Now, but the timing of that is pretty important. Now, there's a couple of things about the glory of God. The first that you need to understand is that for most Jewish people, the glory of God is connected to the temple that stands in Jerusalem. So when they think about the glory of God and where God dwells and where the glory of God is present, the glory of God would be in the temple at Jerusalem. Now, when Ezekiel sees the glory of God and he sees that vision in Ezekiel chapter 1, he's not in Jerusalem. He is already in Babylon. He's already in exile. Now, this is kind of important too. I hope I don't lose you in this. The temple in Jerusalem is still standing. It hasn't been destroyed yet. It's still 5 years until that temple is going to be destroyed. So Ezekiel, being a priest and from a priestly family, understanding that the glory of God's usually connected to the temple that's in Jerusalem, he's in Babylon and he sees this incredible vision of the glory of God, which helps him realize the glory of God is not just connected to the temple in Jerusalem. Now, Ezekiel at this time is 30 years old. And that's important because 30 years old is when priests went into service at the temple. And he's from a priestly family, except remember, he's not in Jerusalem. He's in Babylon. He's an exile. He was taken there into the exile that happened under King Jehoiakim, which was about 597 BC. So he's been there roughly 5 years. He's been in Babylon. This is probably about, Daniel was exiled in the first group of exiles, and Ezekiel is in the second group of exiles. So Daniel has actually been in Babylon longer than Ezekiel has been there. So you have one prophet who's in the government And then you have Ezekiel, and he's going to be the prophet to the people, and he is the prophet out on the banks of the Kebar River. Now, the importance of that is understanding the glory of God. And the glory of God is not confined to Jerusalem. And Ezekiel is trying to explain to the people through his prophecies what's going to happen. So God gives Ezekiel another vision within the book. And this other vision in the book is Ezekiel chapters 8, verse 11. And God takes Ezekiel, and in a vision, he shows Ezekiel all of the idolatry that's happening in the temple of God. And in that vision, what he's trying to help Ezekiel see is that even those who are serving in the temple, even those who are the priest, they've turned their backs on God. They're not worshiping him, they're worshiping something else. And so Ezekiel is going to see in these series of visions, he's going to see the glory of God leave the temple. Now, I tried to get AI to create that too, and that was about the best it could do, which not really a fan of, but it's better than nothing. God begins to slowly withdraw his presence from the temple. First, Ezekiel sees it coming out of the inner sanctuary. If you remember the inner sanctuary is where the Holy of Holies is. It's where they believe that the presence of God is dwelling. And Ezekiel sees the presence of God come out of that Holy of Holies room, and it goes to the threshold of the temple, to the door frame. And then Ezekiel sees the glory of God leave the door frame of the building, and he sees it go out to the east gate of the temple. And he watches at the east gate of the temple as the Spirit, the glory of God, departs from there, and it goes to the Mount of Olives. And then all of a sudden it moves on. And it's a really interesting kind of vision because it doesn't happen all at once and it doesn't happen all quickly. It happens slowly. It's not a sudden departure. It's measured and it's mournful and it's even holy. He sees that vision about 592. The temple's still standing. You know, there's some theologians and they argue, well, did he see the glory of God leave the temple in 592, or does he just see a vision of what the glory of God was going to do when it did leave the temple eventually? It doesn't matter what you do with that and how you argue about it. We don't know that either way for sure, but God's making something extremely clear. And the thing that he's making clear is simply this. A holy God cannot dwell with sin. A holy God can't stay in that temple that's full of idolatry and full of sin, even though his presence has been there. He can't stay there because it's sinful and it's unholy. God can't remain. It's the same message that they're getting through other prophets when they're saying, look, Babylon is going to destroy Jerusalem because you won't turn back to me. You won't be my people. You won't follow me. You won't honor me. And God's saying, this is what's going to happen. And Ezekiel, all the way over, he's already in Babylon. Jerusalem hasn't fell, but he has already seen this vision of the glory of God depart out of the temple because God can't stay with sin. And the problem is the people. The problem is the people have what God calls a heart of stone. Now, when we read a description like that, we think, well, man, they're not doing anything religious, are they? I mean, if they've got a heart of stone, they're not doing anything that looks religious in any way. And that's not true. The priest, he shows Ezekiel the vision of the priest and the idolatry that's still in the temple. You know where the priests are still offering sacrifices every day? At the temple. The glory of God departs the inner sanctuary where the presence of God would dwell. And who still went into the most holy place one time a year? The high priest. You know how serious they were about that? If tradition and what we've read is true, do you know that they would actually tie a rope onto the ankle of the high priest that went in before God in case he got in there and did something wrong and God killed him so they could pull him back out? They knew that there was something serious about the Holy of Holies. They were still going there, but they weren't honoring God. People were still bringing their sacrifices. They're still bringing their sacrifices every day and every week. They're still burning them on the altar. But God says they got a heart of stone. They're not following me. They're still keeping the laws. They're still keeping the feast days. They're still doing all of their little rituals. But God says, your heart's not with me. You've got a heart of stone. And I wonder sometimes if God looks down on us, does he say, okay, do you have a heart of stone? What kind of heart would God say that we have? Are we just kind of going through a ritual? We show up on a Sunday morning because we say we're supposed to show up on a Sunday morning and check that off of list. And I'm really happy you're here on Sunday morning. I'm not telling you not to come, but it's not like you're checking a box on a list. Or we try to do the right thing, or we try to do certain things. And we say, well, we've got the form right, and God's looking at the form. The form is right. It's the heart that is messed up. So God says to Ezekiel, this is what I'm going to do. I'll give them one heart, and I'll put a new spirit in them, and I will take the heart of stone out of their flesh and give I'll give them one that's not stone. I'll give them a heart like a heart's supposed to be. And they may walk in my statutes and keep my ordinances and do them, then they will be my people and I shall be their God. Now, there's something interesting about that verse. They were keeping statutes and ordinances and doing part of those. But they weren't doing it with the heart that God wanted them to have. And he says, I'm going to give them the new spirit. Now, you read all of that, and there's this interesting thing that God says in Ezekiel. Listen to this. Therefore say to the house of Israel, this is what the sovereign Lord says. It is not for your sake, O house of Israel, that I'm going to do these things, but for the sake of my holy name, which you have profaned among the nations where you have gone. And I will show you the holiness of my great name, which has been profaned among the nations, the name you have profaned among them. And the nations will know that I am the Lord, declares the sovereign Lord, when I show myself holy to you, through you, before their eyes. So why is God doing all of that? Why is God going to give them the new heart? It's for the sake of his name. Because they've caused his name to be profaned. They've caused his name to be rejected by the nations who live around them. So here's what's happening. God says, I'm going to bring judgment on you because you have a heart of stone. But at the same time, God is saying, I'm going to give you a restoration. I'm going to cause something to happen. It's, like he compares them to their rebellious ancestors. He says, well, I'm going to make you pass under the rod. I'll purge out the rebels, but he's going to give them grace for the sake of his name. He's operating because of who he is and because of what he is able to do. So God explains it to Ezekiel this way. Ezekiel walks out into this valley in a vision, and the valley is just full of bones. Now, they're not just described as bones, they're described as dry bones. Now, I don't know what kind of image you get when you think of about a dry bone, but it is just a valley filled with dry bones. And when I think about dry bones, I think about bones that have been laying there for quite a while. Those bones, God says in the vision, he says they represent Israel. Because they're dead and they're lifeless and they don't have any heart and they don't have any spirit. And he asked Ezekiel a question. He says, can these bones live? And Ezekiel says to God, only you know that. That's a good answer, by the way. So in the vision, God breathes life into those bones. And they start to come back together. And they start to rise up. And they start to be living beings again. And God says, that's what Israel is like. They're like that valley of dry bones, but I am going to raise them up, and I'm going to be their God, and they're going to be my people. And so then God gives Ezekiel another vision. He gives him this vision. It goes from about chapter 40 through the end of the book. And he gives him this vision of this incredible new temple. It's unlike any temple that had ever been built before. And it wasn't a description of a physical temple because it's not a temple that has ever been built. But it is this vision of this incredible temple of God. And its beauty, and it's holy. And Ezekiel sees this really incredible vision. You remember how he saw the glory of God depart from the temple? God left because of the sin. In this next vision, what he sees is he sees the glory of God returning to the temple. It's more incredible than any temple that Solomon ever built. There's a river that flows right through it. I like the idea of the river because he measures the river at different spots and it gets deeper and deeper and deeper. And the shores are lined with fishermen. I get hope out of that. So maybe I get to heaven, there'll be a bunch of fishermen and I just get on the shores with all the fishermen. And it has trees that line the riverbanks and people can always eat from those trees and there's always food available and they can fish and they have crystal clear running water, so they have every provision. So in this vision of the new temple, God says, I've given you everything that you ever need. And it's not about the architecture of the new temple that is impressive. It's just that it represents the presence of God. And so the glory of God departed at the first part of the book from the east. It departed into the east. And then Ezekiel sees from the east the glory of God coming back. And it comes back and it fills the temple and the holiness is restored and the people are pulled back to God and they become people who don't have hearts of stone but honor God with their lives. And all of a sudden Ezekiel has seen this vision of how God is going to move through history and bring his people back to him. It's a really incredible book that I just summarized really, really quickly. And so Jesus comes along and Jesus helps us understand I am the glory of God. I'm the glory made flesh. I'm the Son of God in flesh. I'm the one who has come to bring healing to you. Words like John, the Word became flesh and made his dwelling among us, and we saw his glory. Or Jesus, when he's teaching in the temple, and he says, whoever believes in me, streams of living water will flow from within him. And those who were listening to him, who knew the book of Ezekiel, knew exactly what he was talking about. Jesus standing on the Mount of Olives, looking over the city. And that book of Ezekiel about the glory of God departing from the Mount of Olives, and now it's coming back, and now it even comes back in the presence of Jesus. And so Jesus came to give us something new, to give us a different kind of heart. He came so that the living temple would be the temple of the Spirit. One of the things that Ezekiel is trying to get you to understand is about the temple of God. The Spirit descends, and the Spirit descends on people, and then people become the temple. Don't you know that you are the temple of God? Remember how Paul wrote that? The you in that is plural. It's the place where God dwells. So Jesus came to give us even a different kind of temple than even Ezekiel could understand. When Paul writes Ephesians, he says, you're being built together into a dwelling place of God. That's us. We become the dwelling place of God. So all of the sudden we begin to understand through Ezekiel and through Jesus, it's not about people, it's about people, it's not about place. So Ezekiel is in Babylon, and the glory of God is supposed to dwell in Jerusalem, but he sees the glory of God in Babylon. It's not about the place the glory of God is. Remember, God says one time, could the heavens contain me? Could the heavens contain me? And the answer to that, if you don't know, is no. The heavens can't contain God. So Ezekiel sees the presence of God depart, and then it comes back. And then what we see from that is the presence of God is here. And you say, okay, so it's at Clarksville Highway. No, it has nothing to do with the walls. It has nothing to do with the bricks on the outside of the building. It has nothing to do with location. You know, I get tickled sometimes. I'll tell people I preach at Clarksville Highway Church of Christ. They'll say, where are you from? And I'm from Clarksville Highway Church of Christ. Now, when I say Clarksville Highway Church of Christ, do you know the next question? I always get it. Where in Clarksville are you? Well, I'm not. Well, I thought you said you were at Clarksville Highway. Well, I am. But you're not in Clarksville. No, we're on Clarksville Highway. We're on the highway that goes to Clarksville. Before the interstate, right, Reggie? Now, if you're going the other direction, is it Nashville Highway? Okay, so I guess it depends on which direction you're going, which highway you're on. And you look at that and think, well, Greg, I just get tired of explaining to people that I'm not in Clarksville. I'm at Clarksville Highway, but I'm not in Clarksville. I've always wondered, and don't worry, I'm not campaigning for a name change. I always wondered why we didn't just call it Pinnacle, right? Since we're at the Pinnacle School. But that's a whole different point. The point here, it's not about place. Is it about these walls? No, it's not about the walls. Now, are we happy the walls are here? Yes. I'm glad men had vision and they built this church here. They built this building. But the presence of God doesn't have to do with place. It has to do with people. That's why Ezekiel can see the presence of God in Babylon. That's why God can leave the temple and come back to the temple. Now we are the temple. It's us. Now, we say that a lot. But I just want you to stop and think about it for a minute. God chooses to dwell in us. If people wanted to see a representation of the glory of God in our world, what would they look at? They would look at us. People wanted to experience the presence of God in some physical form in our world, how would they experience that? They would experience it in us. If remember God did it for the sake of His name because His name had been profaned through the nations. If God wants to glorify His name in the nations, how is God going to glorify His name? He's going to do it in us. Because the presence of God is not a place, it's a people. It's us. So when Ezekiel sees that vision and he asks about a people who have a heart of stone or a heart of flesh, God would be looking at us. And He would be asking, are you my glory in the world? Does the world see my glory through you? Now, you can interpret that a couple of ways. You can say, well, the you is all of us together. It's the combination of the church, and you would be absolutely right. That would be the correct answer. Or you could say, well, you could also be me individually because the Spirit of God lives in me, and you would be absolutely right because that's deeply theological. It's just a simple question. Are you reflecting the glory of God? God has chosen to make His glory in the world present through us. And what kind of reflection are we? What kind of temple are you? What kind of people are we? I hope that God wouldn't show up and give us the same message that He gave Ezekiel. They got a heart of stone. And maybe if we do have a heart of stone, or you have a heart of stone, maybe today's the day that you need just to start helping that heart of stone become a heart of flesh. God says, I'm coming to do something new. That's what he told Ezekiel. Do you know the new thing that he did? The new thing that he did was in Jesus. The new thing that he did was the gift that we have through who Jesus is. And I just ask you, honor God and the glory of his presence in all that you do.